welcome back to the Golden Spear channel, and today we're going to review The End of Enlightenment by Richard Stratchan. Now, I'm personally not the biggest fan of the Lumineth Realm Lords, and despite how fun the book is, I feel like it perfectly encapsulates why I feel that way. I'll get to that point eventually. Just wanted to preface the video with it. As per usual, there'll be spoilers, so this is your fair warning. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. So, this story is focused around the conflict between the Oziark Bone Reapers and the Lumineth Realm Lords during the Dawnbringer books, a little while before 4th edition dropped. The conflict is pretty interesting as it started with the Necroquake that started the Soul Wars. Now, before that point, the Realm Lords were very aloof of the problems of the other mortal realms, as they were one of the few that didn't have like a huge chaos problem during the Age of Chaos. They actually managed to wage a pretty successful war against the forces of chaos that kept Heish mostly unscarred, all things considered. So prior to the Necroquake, they'd happily gone about their business, essentially ignoring the other realms. But the Necroquake causes, as we know, the Nighthaunt faction to come into existence and basically run amok in every realm. The book is a while after that, with various undead forces having been purged from Heish, and now the Lumineth are venturing into Shyish to get their own back. One thing I feel the premise does very well, it's something you'll enjoy if, unlike me, you're a fan of the Lumineth Realm Lords, is the way it shows the divide in mentality between the Lumineth groups. So, for reference, each Realm Lord follows a certain spirit or aspect of the Teclamentari, such as Alathi being the mountain rune, meaning patience and stubbornness, pretty immovable, and Senlui being swiftness and accuracy. So it does display that although each individual Lumineth follows their own rune, their personalities are very linked to the rune they bear, which in essence is what causes the book's events to unfold, as in swift reaction to Nagash's actions. With the whole Necroquake, the Lumineth have started launching counter-assaults on Shyish. So, let's go over the story. Again, spoilers ahead. It's just a brief summary of the story. I'll go over it vaguely, because I want to make sure, obviously, you read it for yourself. But this is the general kind of stuff I've got. The story begins with us following Venari High Warden Tureth Egethan. She's currently with the Lumineth war host in Shyish, reflecting on the words of her brother. Immediately we get the feeling that Tureth and her brother Kareth have a strained relationship, to say the least. But the books describe her as seeing him as quite cold when he bids her farewell. But despite that, she clearly looks at him fondly when a page later she reminisces on his words, specifically the ones that bringing war to Shyish is a bad idea, while her forces prepare to strike an Oziark necropolis. As it would mean as war, in the Lumineth mindset, means indulging in emotions that Teclis taught the Realm Lords to balance, as emotions were what caused Chaos to gain access to Shyish to begin with, the overflowing arrogance and the use of constant spells being the main catalyst of that. But not only do we see the arrogance of the Lumineth, as Tureth actually pities the foe that they're facing for having to now face the ire of the Lumineth Realm Lords. In the ensuing battle, we get our first glimpse of the book's antagonist, Akrados, who is the Liege Cavalos of the Steliarch Lords, and is also the one who kills Tureth in the opening prologue. This action, of course, sets up the entire rest of the book. Over the next chapters, we then switch perspective to following Kareth Egethan, who is the main character, a stone mage of the mountain of Ultharadon. He is Tureth's brother, and we get a look into his mind and attitude. Very quickly, it's established he fought in the War of Reclamation, which is the war when the Lumineth fought Chaos off Heish, the few that had got through, which ultimately stopped them from corrupting the Realm of Light in really any way. And although most of the Lumineth see him as a war hero, we learn that he hates war and the loss wrought from war, because he's, in his experience, had to sacrifice a lot of lives and a lot of his fellow soldiers in order to save Hish. It does the job of portraying him as like older and wiser now. It shows us a little bit of the running of an Alethi temple, and it begins with him for a while reading the Yukari Dara. Basically, that's a collection of all the past mistakes the Lumineth made that allowed chaos into Hish, and why they govern their emotions so heavily. We also see that he regrets the way he and his sister parted. He doesn't like that they parted on such unfortunate terms, with him coming across so coldly and her ending up basically walking out in tears. It paints him as almost like looking down on his sister in the way that I feel like a lot of older brothers do, in that he views her as far too immature and too quick to action. She's too quick to like the anger, and as a result, he kind of believes he has to behave this way around her. The other thing we learn at the end of this following chapter is actually how deep the bonds of family go in the Lumineth. Because as she passes away, as she dies, as she's killed by Akrados, actually feels the moment she dies and passes out, sending the entire temple into panic mode. We then swap perspectives again, and this time we're following around Akrados, the Liege Kavalos. And this chapter is very good, at least in my opinion, because it shows that the Bone Reapers are a lot more than just mindless constructs for Nagash. So, the leaders of the Bone Reapers, especially so. Liege Kavaloses and Bone Reapers and other high-ranking figures are, as we discover, given free will and the ability to remain fragmented memories of what they were before Nagash remade them. Of course, this is a sick trick by Nagash, because Nagash enjoys these ironic punishments, so he likes letting these warlords remember what they were compared to what they are now as just essentially a slave of his will, with the Bone Shapers acting as essentially his voice within the legions of the Bone Reapers. It's through these kind of fragmented memories in this bit we remember that Akrados remembers himself as a powerful human lord before the Age of Chaos, and his constant remembering of his past glory and accomplishments makes him very, very arrogant and very, very proud. And in the opening book, he actually lost that fight. Despite the fact they inflicted quite heavy casualties on the Lumineth, the Ozyark Bone Reapers lost that fight, and it wounded his pride quite deeply. But then we learn something interesting through a conversation he has with one of his Bone Shapers, and that's that he has had the soul of Tureth implanted within his soul gem, which is what keeps him alive. So her soul is now trapped within the undead warlord. Of course, this sets up the book, basically. This is like the number one driving force for Kareth going forward. As the book continues, Kareth, of course, learns this eventually and is visited by Teclis himself. And Teclis gives him the task of killing Akrados, because he basically says that if Akrados is able to get to the light of Eltharion, he could potentially kill him. He's potentially a massive influential factor in the war between Hish and Shaish. And so he's given the task of killing him. So Kareth, having been completely stricken by grief, agrees to this holy task. But he becomes so obsessed with saving his sister from being trapped in the Liege Kavalos, he starts using this kind of holy duty from Teclis in order to achieve this goal. It basically showed him allowing his emotions to get the better of him on multiple occasions, even giving in and dabbling in necromancy to attempt to save his sister, which to the Realm Lords is a massive no-no. To them, that's some of the stuff that got them in trouble in the first place, so they don't touch that. That's forbidden magic now. So there's a lot of going on, a lot of preparation through the following chapters, showing the Lumineth building their strength, getting their allies, kind of setting themselves up ready for this massive clash, because they're under no illusion that the Bone Reapers are a powerful enemy to have. They constantly rebuild, they're nearly endless in Legion, and they are incredibly well regimented. So they're under no illusion that the fight they're having here is going to be a damn struggle. So eventually, about halfway through the book, in chapter 12, the forces clash in a place called Pirthalan. Yeah, Pass, which I'm going to be honest, this fight scene, a ton of fun to read. It has a lot of character work between Kareth and his cohorts, and it's one of those battles you can almost like see it unfolding on the tabletop. You can almost like see each unit moving and how they would fight, and it's a really good book. However, during the battle, Kareth reveals his plan and tries to rip his sister's soul out of Akrados to try and free it. But unfortunately, he then, by doing that, discovers that to rip her out of this soul gem, thanks to the powerful necromantic magics that are keeping her in there, would basically destroy her soul. So she wouldn't go to Teclis, she wouldn't go to Chaos, she wouldn't go to anyone. Her soul would just be obliterated in attempting to free it, which of course causes him to break the spell, because no matter how desperate he tries, he cannot bring himself to kill his sister again. And that actually leads to them losing the battle. It's a bloody battle with a lot of casualties on both sides, and shows how tenacious the Lumineth Realm Lords are and how far they're willing to go to keep the battle going. However, they ultimately lose and retreat back to the temple at Ultharadon. At Ultharadon, some events unfold, some things happen that give you a good look at Kareth and how much faith he has in the Mountain Ultharadon, and how hurt he is that he made the mistake in his arrogance of trying to dabble in these forbidden magics. But we also see Akrados becoming more and more obsessed with Kareth as time has gone on over the book. He's become more and more obsessed with killing him and besting him. And it kind of comes to a head shortly after the Battle of Perthalon Pass, when he starts butting head with his chief Bone Shaper, because Nagash has basically ordered them all to convene on him to face the Light of Eltharion and Teclis. Of course, they don't know the Light of Eltharion's there yet. But Akrados refuses, because Akrados believes that by attacking and destroying Ultharadon, he will draw the Light of Teclis to him, where he can then kill it. His Bone Shaper obviously says, no, we're of the same rank, we need to go. We need to go to Nagash as ordered, or so help me. And we see just how obsessed he has become because he kills him. He straight just decapitates his Bone Shaper for daring to try and temper his ego. And he carries the head around and starts talking to it on the road. And it's a very interesting dynamic as they finally come for this final clash, with the Lumineth being very outnumbered. Now, I won't spoil the final chapters and the last battle, as I believe it is a really fun battle scene, and I advise giving it a read, definitely. It is an awesome last stand type battle, filled with some awesome moments of magic and fighting that over the course of the book, I've come to expect from the Lumineth Realm Lords. It's a very, very good read and a very good fight sequence overall, especially by the standards of Warhammer Age of Sigmar battles. I feel like, personally, the book is pretty well structured, and I feel like the writer, and massive props to Richard Stratchan for having this, has actually taken some time to learn the setting and the faction before making the story, which is a pitfall I feel a lot of Black Library writers can fall into, just kind of going their own creative direction with something, and as a result that they no longer match up with the lore of their faction. And again, I understand that there are going to be exceptions to every rule. I think that's very cool. But it's when, it's like the common mistake with, I'll go to a Warhammer 40k book for reference, when a Harlequin killed an Adeptus Custodes with a thin piece of piano wire, because the writer had mistaken the Custodes for basically being Imperial Guard. It's a very good depiction of conflict that is pretty compelling and kept me reading. I definitely recommend giving it a read, especially if you're a fan of the Lumineth Realm Lords or the Bone Reapers. Now, just to go over the problems I do have with the book, these are just to express my negative opinions, because I do have them. Please remember, just as a note, these are my personal feelings and takes, and by no means are reflections of failings of the book. They're just my opinion. First off, the Lumineth Realm Lords, to me, feel way too similar to the Craftworld Eldar in Warhammer 40k. Now, I know the same thing can be said about the Stormcast Eternals being way too similar to the Space Marines in Warhammer 40k. But I personally feel the Stormcast have enough about them, especially now that we're rolling into 4th edition, that make them stand apart from the Space Marines. Enough of their characters and culture as a faction are different enough from the Space Marines to make them stand out as their own group. Whereas the Realm Lords feel nearly identical in terms of lore, with the main difference being the fact they use magic, not psychic powers, but they seem to have had the same thing. Their powers have led to the unleashing of chaos in their realm, and as a result they've had to kind of temper their emotions and become very controlled about how they use their magic, what schools of magic they use, and how their emotions are expressed to not draw them in, which sounds very similar to a certain faction we know in 40k. Of course, this isn't the fault of Richard Stratchan, who, I don't know why, but his second name reminds me of a certain Imperial Guard commander. But yeah, I just feel like this book overall doesn't do anything to differentiate the Realm Lords from the Eldar. If anything, I feel like it makes the similarities even more egregious. I also feel that the book can sometimes make the timeline of events a little bit confusing. I had to double check once or twice when I was reading the book to understand what part was a flashback and what part was the event unfolding. Sometimes it wasn't done the clearest, but overall I'd say it's not a massive issue. Again, these aren't necessarily faults of the book, these are just my personal issues. Overall, I'd say the book's worth your time. It's a good book with 3 very fun and well-narrated battle sequences. I'd argue, if you're a fan of Lumineth Realm Lords or the Ozark Bone Reapers, this book is probably a must-read. The characters are interesting. It's a solid way to get yourself into the Lumineth Realm Lords or the Ozark Bone Reapers as an army on the tabletop if you've been thinking about collecting one of them anyway. But outside of that, just as a general Age of Sigmar book, I'd say it's pretty good. And there's a lot of cool, like I said, there's a lot of cool battles on here that I personally would love to see unfold on a tabletop game. Because I think these forces clashing in this manner, in these kind of terrain, could be really fun to watch. But yeah, that's about it from me. So, The End of Enlightenment, good book. Definitely give it a read if you get the chance. You should be able to pick it up for about £9 if you're in the UK, and roughly $16 if you live in the US. But yeah, I definitely advise giving it a read. It's a pretty cheap book. It's a lot of fun to read and very interesting. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and hopefully I will see you next time.